Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products.
Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the IOSU Dairy Team. I'm Fred Hall, Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist. I'm here with Jen Bentley, the Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, as we discuss today's topic. Welcome back to the podcast, Jen.
Well, thanks, Fred. It's great to be here. And, we've had a busy week with your virtual ag lender seminar and really some great topics that were presented. So I'm glad we can, feature those here in our podcast this week.
Jen, we're welcoming Mike North from EVER.AG to recap his presentation during the virtual ag lenders seminar held earlier this week. Mike grew up on the family dairy farm in southeast Wisconsin and earned his BS in agribusiness with a minor in dairy science. He founded Commodity Risk Management Group in 2014 and combined with several other companies in 2019 to form EVER.AG. His team of brokers and advisors leads production and processing clients in efforts to build a marketing plan. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Well, good to be here. Glad to join both of you.
Mike, in your presentation, you talked about where U.S. agriculture experts go to. Can you identify these top buyers and how they've changed in the past few years?
Absolutely. The mainstay of that list is really centered around two geographies, North America and then Southeast Asia. And as you look at our top partners, Canada has been number one, China has been number two, Mexico number three, and then that's followed by Japan, EU, and South Korea in that order. And as you look at the landscape, it's really been shaped by a couple of different things. Obviously, NAFTA over the last 25 years has played into our North American relationships, and just born out of simple geographic advantage, we do a lot of business with our neighbors to the north and to the south. That obviously was up for grabs as we went through the renegotiation of NAFTA and formed the newly signed USMCA, and that really over the next several years is slated, especially for dairy, to find greater growth in U.S. exports to those nations. And then as we look into Southeast Asia, that has been a market that, going back to the beginning of the new millennium here, has seen a lot of growth economically. And South Korea is certainly a shining star there. And even though they're number 6, when you look at the amount of purchasing that they do from us relative to their population, I would put them up against China any day. China, of course, being the second largest economy in the world and continuing to grow even through COVID. So that partnership will continue to run strong. Soybeans being the biggest product they buy from us, as their economy grows and personal wealth and disposable income in households continue to expand, they'll continue to demand more animal protein, and ultimately that's where the soybeans come into play. And so that partnership, born out of their prosperity, will likely continue to grow as well, especially on the soybean front, given that they use a third of the world's soybeans, but only produce 15% of their need.
You mentioned South Korea. Is part of that phenomenal growth because of the free trade agreement?
Free trade agreement, yes, but just their overall free market landscape. They've really embraced that, and they've really created an environment to allow their economy to grow freely without any intrusion by the government. And as a byproduct of that, wealth has grown very fast in that region. And that's just like we're talking about in some of these other countries, that spurred more and more demand for goods. I mean, let's face it, they're a very small geography. They just don't have all of the natural resources to produce what they need, so they must demand them from other countries. And it's their free market environment that has driven that growth.
And Mike, during the webinar, we had some discussions on the trade with China, looking for those additional purchases of U.S. ag products by $32 billion over 2 years. What does that specifically mean to our dairy producers?
Well, I think as you look at the agreement that was signed in January, that being, of course, the phase 1 trade deal, I think it's important to recognize that we have not seen China come to the table in the way that it was fleshed out in that agreement. They've fallen drastically short of hitting the mark, albeit we have seen a pretty sizable uptick from the last couple of years as we have wrestled through this trade war. But bottom line is, agriculture as a whole was supposed to see about $36.5 billion of purchases through the course of 2020. As of September's data, we were just shy of 13 billion. So with 3 months left in terms of reporting and only, roughly 7 weeks left in terms of actual calendar, it seems unlikely that they're going to hit that number. But right alongside of the phase 1 trade deal is this ongoing recovery of the African swine fever issue that decimated their hog herd. If you go back to 2018 when this first came on the scene, from the first case reported into about April of 2019, they lost about 40% of their hog herd. That was largely found in small backyard operations. And as they recover and as they rebuild that herd, it's being rebuilt inside of larger commercial facilities with greater biosecurity, greater efficiencies, et cetera. And so we're seeing pig litter sizes grow. We're seeing a pretty quick recovery in hog numbers. With that, their demand for whey has grown pretty sizably, pretty quickly. And so we've watched as whey demand has been very, very strong. And as a byproduct of phase 1 and this regrowth of their hog herd, there's going to be ongoing demand for whey as we go forward. We also see opportunities in the powder market. If you talk about the world dairy trade, ultimately, it's not what we would consider here domestically. Our minds gravitate towards things like cheese and butter and finished product. The world largely trades ingredients, and our business with China on the dairy front is largely contained in the powder market and in the whey market. And a lot of that is just simply a function of shipping, right? We don't want to send finished product that needs refrigeration. We don't want to send product that has a lot of water in it. Bottom line is we're sending dry goods that ship easily, and whey and powder play into that very, very well. And we also have to consider the preferences there. They don't consume cheese the way that we do. It's a very small product by way of consumer choices. Maybe over time that can expand, and we have seen expansion, by the way. It's just a very small segment of their demand. Reality, though, is we'll continue to do a lot of business in whey and a lot of business in powder as they build protein into their diets and as they continue to feed their pigs.
Okay, you'd mentioned that, powder is kind of the universal trade item, not only to China, but around the world. Let's be specific and look at butter. We've seen some significant changes in butter, and I think a lot of our listeners will be curious on how much butter do we import?
Well, and that's been kind of an interesting storyline, Fred. As you look at the last several years, we maintained a very high price relative to the world market. A lot of that has changed in the course of the last year and a half, and we've brought our price points much, much lower. Frankly, we're back to being relatively competitive in that space. This year, butter imports have actually fallen off quite a bit. Historically, we have been a big purchaser of butter. When you look at butter fat as a whole, again, it's the smallest product category that we have out there. Imports in previous years have been as much as 3 to 5 times what our exports were, and it had everything to do with price. But I really believe as we go forward, and we're still feeling our way through this right now, but as we go forward with large butter volumes and ongoing closures or at least limited capacities of full service food service establishments, you're likely to see us become much more involved in the butter export space. Keep in mind, some of the butter imports are a function of preference. A lot of the imports that we take on are Irish butter. And again, that has kind of a branding and marketing play to it, especially in large urban centers. There's been some attraction to Irish butter, much in the same way we would talk about organic fluid milk. And so that is something that I think will continue to have a bit of a foothold. We'll continue to import because of that preference, not because of the competitiveness, but because of consumer preference. And, frankly, as we bring in specialty products like that, the likelihood of us with the current price points where they're at, bringing in more commercial commodity style butter has gotten a lot smaller. So look for imports to continue, but I'd say on the commodity commercial style butters, we with our price where it's at, could ultimately become quite sizable exports in ways that we haven't been in the past.
Yeah, those are some good points, Mike. And we can't probably talk about dairy prices without also bringing up the topic of COVID-19, because that's really affected a lot of the usage of our dairy products, in restaurants, consumer usage, schools. So from your perspective, how do you think COVID-19 has affected the financial situation for our producers?
Well, the reality is that at the onset of all of this, we obviously saw major ripples in the supply chain that negatively impacted price. But in response to that, the government stepped in and passed several different initiatives that have really brought people back to the table financially. As we look at the CFAP payment, for example, having that early payment brought a lot of dollars back into the dairy financial circle that weren't in April initially thought to be there or even remotely possible. That's been a big help. Obviously, as you look at the food box program, that has been massive. It's definitely created some winners and losers across the space. And what I mean by that is food box programs have favored two categories, that being fluid milk and even more so cheese. And as a byproduct, that's driven up the class 3 markets to record levels, $23, $24, price points that we had not seen since back in 2014 when prices made the big run on Chinese purchases. But bottom line here is that we have a market that has seen some pretty big push. Now, as we come out of the backside of this last round of food box purchases, which are set to expire at the end of the year and really represent the smallest amount of dollars allocated towards the purchase of product, the question that we have to ask is what lives on the other side of the calendar year. Will there be response, even with a new White House, to address the unemployment rate and byproduct to support those who have been in a more ongoing fashion negatively impacted by COVID-19 and loss of work, et cetera? Or will we move towards more of a cash distribution towards farmers and otherwise? That remains unseen and unknown. We'll watch that, but certainly COVID-19 is not dead at the end of this year, nor will be the response by USDA and government to support people on and off the farm. So look for some other degree of support as we go forward. But I'd say, the coronavirus environment has certainly created some negative demand elements, but there has been a lot of government response to support price and income at the farm. And in the end, many producers are looking at as much as a third of their overall revenue attributed to government involvement, and that's huge.
Setting the unknowns as far as stimulus payments in the future, what do you see ahead for milk prices considering production increases and the economic downturn here and worldwide?
I was asked a similar question earlier this morning on a radio program, and ultimately, my response was that we are in a great and vast unknown with regard to an answer to that question, and largely because, relative to my last response, we don't know how the government is going to get involved. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of programs come into play with this new administration. But, at the same time, beyond the discussion of programs, you also have to factor in the big demand season for dairy products, which is upon us now. Fourth quarter of any given year is when we move a lot of dairy. And how will the American people come together for things like Thanksgiving and for Christmas celebrations, both in their families and for work events? How will people move about one another? Will they be going out to restaurants? Will they be celebrating New Year's the way they have? Will there be a Super Bowl celebration like we typically get, and the product buying that precedes that through all of the retail supply chain? There's so many unanswered questions to that. But if we don't see government involvement, and we do see trimming of demand and just lack of gatherings and people coming together to enjoy dairy products, and certainly that's not why they come together, but as they do, dairy fits into those family circles and parties quite well. If they fail to do that, demand will fall off. And so as you look at the increase in cow numbers and consequent production relative to the strong prices we've had of late, and you compare that to the potential of big fallout in demand, certainly the picture gets pretty dark. But here too, we don't know where the government steps in. And if you look at the last 3 months, specifically, after we came through the first round of food box, there was lots of question about what would come next. And we saw, each of the following food box initiatives that would follow it in the market would be, reboosted, if you will. Should they enter the market, that could change the picture in 2021. But we are preparing producers right now for a more negative price experience, especially on the Class 3 front, where there's been so much buying and new demand brought forward with the food box program. All the way around, our price forecast looks pretty negative as we enter 2021 without government involvement.
Yeah, that was kind of leading into my next question, Mike. There's a lot of unknowns right now coming into the end of the year. And right now we're sitting pretty strong with prices, but like you said, there could be some lower prices up ahead. So how do we get our producers thinking about some of those risk management strategies, or what should they be thinking about right now?
Well, I think there's two major descriptors that you can insert here with regard to how you manage price. One being certainty. And, that's really one of the jobs of risk management and marketing, and that is to create certainty both in revenue but also in feed. And let's not forget the feed side of this discussion, because that plays towards profit margins. But that second word is flexibility. As you combine those two and look inside the producer's toolbox, I think there are a couple of them that kind of sift themselves to the top, if you will. First and foremost being that of DMC, and certainly as we go through the fall and the sign up there, we encourage every producer to be a participant there, at least up to the first 5 million pounds of annual production, and at the highest rate of 9.5. Right along with that, another program that's underwritten by the government is DRP. We really believe that that's a product that every dairyman should be implementing into their business. And a lot of that stems from the fact that the government is subsidizing it in the same way they are subsidizing crop insurance, which 96% of corn is covered with crop insurance. Nearly everyone is using it. And whether you're a dairy or a grain farmer, you're taking advantage of that subsidized coverage in order to manage the risk associated with production and price. From a dairyman's perspective, dairy revenue protection, or DRP as we like to refer to it, has all those same attributes. It's subsidized by the government, up to 50%. You have different quarters of coverage that you can buy coverage on. It acts very much like a put option, but you have someone else sponsoring a big portion of the bill, and that allows you to again, I'll use the word, create certainty in your milk revenue piece of the business. As we take that a step further, then, since a DRP endorsement or the DRP product is much like a subsidized put option, that second realm of coverage, that second tool, if you will, would be options themselves. We're big advocates of the CME listed futures and options. Bottom line is, as you come to the table in 21 with all the unknowns that are on the table, that certainty that's afforded in options is a great way to come at the market. We're not as big of a proponent of selling milk with futures or writing forward contracts. Those tools also exist. If a guy goes down that path, they're well served to couple that with a option strategy right alongside of it to, again, bring flexibility back into the market. And really, as you look at the top two tools outside of just the government program of dairy margin coverage, DRP and options go hand in hand. And one of the reasons that we're one of the biggest players in that space is because those two fit hand in glove, and they really should be used together, not as a replacement for each other or independent of each other, but together. There's lots of complements there, and that's really how we guide people through risk management. So I guess to summarize all of that, Jen, flexibility and certainty are the driving ends that we are after, and we believe DRP and options are the best approach to get there. Certainly as folks have questions on that, I'd encourage them to reach out to someone they trust or give us a call to walk through some of that, because the timing couldn't be better with some of the opportunities that are on the table.
Thanks, Mike, for walking through those strategies. I think there's more than one tool in our toolbox right now that producers should be thinking about. And, as we conclude the podcast here today, do you have any specific websites or resources that we can direct our listeners to here today?
Absolutely. We just came through our rebranding. So, in the past, people knew us as Commodity Risk Management Group or Rice Dairy. We are one company, and the new name is EVER.AG. And the website is www.ever.ag. Very simple. We have a lot of resources there to help people grow in their understanding of the tools, access to market prices, etc. If you want to get direct links to the CME's quotes on different products, which, keep in mind, the USDA uses CME pricing in their pricing of DRP, and all of your options are, of course, going to be listed at CME. Those prices can be found directly at the CME's website, which is cmegroup.com. And then for more specific analytics on DRP, right from that same EVER.AG website, we have quoters and other things to help people get a handle on how it prices, what kind of coverage levels you have. So a lot of this, and we even have links to the CME Group website ourselves, but all of this can effectively be found on the EVER.AG website. Again, that's www.ever.ag.
Thanks for all the information here today, Mike. And as we conclude, I do want to note that we have basic fact sheets covering this information on Ag Decision Maker and on our Extension Dairy Team website. We will include the link with this recorded podcast. Thanks for joining us today, and look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.